Hey guys, Level Cap here. Today I want to talk about the gameplay differences between the previous Battlefield game, Battlefield 4, and the upcoming Battlefield game, Battlefield 1. Games that make regular sequels don't want exact copies of the games that they had the year before. DICE has often been good about this, adding enough variety and change to keep people interested, but still staying true to keeping Battlefield as a Battlefield game. However, some of their sequels have been extremely similar, like the difference from Battlefield 3 to Battlefield 4. Both with very similar settings, graphics, and weapons. The leap from Battlefield 4 to Battlefield 1, however, is a much bigger leap in just about every way. Sure, the graphics are completely revamped, it's new, the thematic settings are different, so you're going to see different visuals, but the gameplay is also changing completely because of the thematic change. Popular game mechanics that had big impacts on the way that Battlefield 4 played will no longer be in Battlefield 1 simply because of the theme shift, like helicopters, no more lock-on weaponry of any kind, and no handheld rocket launchers. Also, there's not going to be any skyscrapers, so the massive verticality of the big city maps is going to be completely gone. And it's actually pretty cool to consider that just the theme shift is going to force Battlefield to play completely differently than it did before. Just simply architecturally speaking, there weren't really any skyscrapers in Europe during the early 1900s. Some of the tallest buildings in Europe during World War I were a mere 10 or 11 stories tall. They had slightly taller buildings in the US, but that landscape was not being ravaged by war, so that's not going to be part of the game. So obviously verticality is going to be greatly reduced, though we will still have stuff like the windmills that we saw in Scar that allow for a third or fourth story sniping position. But windmill sniping compared to sniping off of the tallest building in Siege of Shanghai is a totally different story. So if you're going to miss that extreme long-range sniping, you might be disappointed by the environments in Battlefield 1, but if you're like me and you certainly don't miss being sniped by some guy 3,000 meters away on top of a skyscraper, then you'll be in luck with the new game. Now, aside from the architectural limitations that force map change for Battlefield 1, some of the biggest changes are simply to the way that infantry play out and interact with vehicles. Obviously, there's not going to be any lock-on weapons in the game, let alone handheld lock-on weapons, or any sort of dumbfire rocket launchers. There is the AT rocket gun, which is much trickier to use than an actual rocket launcher. So basically, infantry's destructive power is going to be significantly limited compared to what it was in previous Battlefield games. Now, soldiers will have weapons like the mortar, which will allow them to sort of lob explosive rounds long distance, but it's going to be nothing like being able to point and shoot a rocket across the map at an armored vehicle. So this is going to greatly change the armor dynamic gameplay. Currently, tanks in the game still have a very good range potential and they can kill things from far away. Infantry, however, have been significantly nerfed in the long-range department, especially considering that there's only one class that can really fight armor effectively now. So that means that the dynamic between infantry fighting armor has changed up significantly, and that will be way different than what people are used to in Battlefield 4. In addition to that, the relationship between infantry and air vehicles is totally different now. First and foremost, there's no more helicopters. Attack helicopters and scout helicopters in Battlefield 4 were incredibly effective weapons, and they're just something that you had to hide from or really get a lucky rocket shot to take them out as infantry, otherwise you're going to die. The gunner seats on those attack helicopters and the pilots themselves could absolutely massacre infantry. Scout helicopters as well, and even a transport helicopter with a good side gunner could still take down infantry. So there was a lot of aerial threats that were specifically designed to take out infantry and were very good at killing infantry. Now, aircraft in Battlefield 1 are capable of hurting and killing infantry. They're just nowhere near on the same level of effectiveness as they were before. In fact, think about maybe a stealth jet in Battlefield 4 and how effective those were at killing infantry. That's kind of the same level that most of the aircraft are on right now. The bombs from the bomber are a bit more effective, but not that much more. So basically, aerial threats are probably the least of your concerns now in Battlefield 1, whereas in Battlefield 4, you see a helicopter coming by, you better run and hide, otherwise you're going down. Now, because we don't have any Iglas or Stinger lock-on weapons to take down down aircraft. Instead, they've placed a whole bunch of flat cannons around the map. These flat cannons are actually incredibly good at taking out aircraft, and they're very hard to anticipate, and if you fly too close to one, you can basically be guaranteed going down if the gunner is even remotely good, because the damage potential on those are absolutely insane. So basically, nobody's an anti-air infantry anymore, but you do have weapons placed around the map that are capable of taking out aircraft. In addition to that, small arms fire damages all aircraft now, which was not a thing in Battlefield 4. So essentially, if an entire squad decides to focus fire an enemy plane coming in, they can do some serious damage, disabling it, messing up the wings, and even taking it down with just small arms fire. So if you think about the comparison between Battlefield 4 to Battlefield 1, aircraft's effectiveness against infantry has gone significantly down, so they've gotten a huge nerf when dealing damage to infantry targets, and infantry have gotten a pretty big buff against actually just dealing damage to them. Yes, they don't have lock-on weapons anymore, but there's a lot of flat cannons now all over the map, and you can use those as any class, not to mention any class and pretty much any small arm, as far as I can tell, deals damage to aircraft as they fly over. So the scales have shifted drastically when it comes to air versus infantry combat. Now again, all of this information is from the alpha. There's plenty of time for DICE to shift up the scales more and give a little bit more power to the air. We'll have to wait and see when the game actually comes out. Now, one of the biggest changes that I think anybody who just purely enjoys infantry combat is going to notice is that there's no more assault rifles, there's no more carbines, there's no standard weapon that you can pick up and just aim at your opponent and fire full auto to take them down incredibly fast. We now have SMGs, but their range is incredibly short and limited. We now have a lot of bolt action, semi-automatic rifles that are good at medium to longer range combat, and then machine guns are going to play out totally differently, where you have to actually hold down the fire button before they become accurate. So the actual infantry gun mechanics have shifted up completely. So transitioning from Battlefield 4 to Battlefield 1 is going to be a bit of a learning process, and sure, I'll have some tutorial videos on that when the game actually comes out to try and ease the transition a bit. But if you really enjoyed the gun mechanics from Battlefield 3 or Battlefield 4 and you hop into Battlefield 1, you might be taken aback a little bit, and there's certainly going to be a little bit of a learning curve. Not to mention the separation of classes and their engagement distances is much more pronounced in this game than previous Battlefield games, where you could kind of configure any class so that they're at least decent in close quarters or medium range, or better for long range. I mean, you could really mold your class to kind of do whatever you wanted it to in Battlefield 4. And Battlefield 1 is much more, nope, this is your role, stick to it or you're not going to do well. Without question, I anticipate a lot of people just not enjoying the new gun mechanics as much, or just missing having assault rifles and carbines. There's a huge market out there for people who enjoy games that are much more focused around modern military combat. An absolutely huge market for it. I mean, the Arma crowd is huge. The current Battlefield crowd is huge. So going back in time and saying, hey, let's get rid of all that high-tech cool stuff and give you some old bolt action, semi-auto, and some kind of goofy looking SMGs here and there, it might not appeal to everyone. And I'm very curious to see how this plays out in the long run. I anticipate a lot of people continuing to play Battlefield 4 for a long time, even after Battlefield 1 comes out, because Battlefield 4 is still going to represent one of the most fun modern military shooters out there. Then again, it could create sort of a market void and allow shooters like the new Squad that's coming out, that's going to feature more than 64 players with vehicle and infantry combat, to sort of fill that Battlefield role for modern military multiplayer shooters. Also, the new Insurgency coming out on the Unreal Engine looks like it could be pretty cool as well. So sort of Battlefield falling out of the modern military market for a little bit could be really good for some of these indie developers, and I'm actually quite excited for those two titles. I think there's a lot of promise there. Now, I wanted to make this video because this is one of the biggest Battlefield transitions we're seeing for the main franchise in quite some time. I mean, we sort of had that experimental Hardline game, which had very, very mixed reactions, and the PC version of it is hardly being played anymore. So doing a big theme shift in a Battlefield game is a big deal. I think this one's going to be very successful. I think it's going to be very cool, but it's also like one of the bigger things that's happening to the franchise. And I think that's in part why people are so excited for it. But it is interesting to know how much the theme shift is actually going to change up the gameplay and the relationship between infantry and vehicles and infantry against other infantry. That's going to be changed quite significantly. So I'm looking forward to it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the Battlefield community adapts and evolves to the new styles and gunplay. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap signing off.